That's okay.
You just
That's what we'll edit afterwards.
podcast to take this.
This is why we get rid of the kids.
Yeah, I'm telling you, if I could shove them back into the womb.
Let's talk about something that all three of us had a lot of experience playing, sometimes together. This is already sounding pretty naughty.
Nice.
But text adventure, graphical adventure games, point and click games. Justin, you and I started back in the day, because we're so old, with the text adventure games that required you to actually use your brain and your thinking and not just follow a map and a list of quest things you had to do. And it all dates back to kind of the big one, 1976, which was Colossal Cave, which I think we played some variation of, whether it was a knockoff or all the shareware games and all the compilations that came out on old computers. And those games were basically about, you had to read a description. Yes, there was reading involved back then, unfortunately, kids, and choose what to do. And kind of the sky was the limit as far as the computer parser was able to interpret what you were saying. So you could open a door, go north, look at a window, take a flask.
And you just have to sit there and imagine why on earth you can't get ye flask.
And you had to figure out where to go, and you had to map it out yourself. And your brain was the screen that showed you everything there was to it. And slowly as those things evolved, we got into the world that all three of us were much more accustomed to, which was the graphical adventure game. And Justin, you mentioned in one of the last podcasts, you mentioned the company's name, and that was Sierra Online. Ken and Roberta Williams, probably a big influential part of our childhood growing up playing games. And I just kind of wanted to throw it out there to share memories of the graphic adventures when the world moved into point and click, and maybe even talk about how it shaped adventure gaming today, because I think the genre is a bit different, but there's still nuggets of what made it so good back then. So Travis, you start, because I think you came into it a bit later than us, but you were a King's Quest, a Hero's Quest guy. You enjoyed playing those. Like, what are some of your thoughts on what that era of gaming was like?
For me, it always reminds me of just spending the night at your house, because I didn't have a computer growing up, and you did. And so whenever we go to your house, that's where I would play those games. So the first one I ever started out with,
I was being used.
For your games, man. But the first ones that I ever played was the Quest for Glory, or I was at the time Hero Quest, and I think that was the kind of way they did it back then. It was Hero Quest, Police Quest, Space Quest, Colonel's B Quest, all these different quest games that they had. But I remember that it was. I remember you'd have those big floppy disks, like 5 1/4, when they were actually floppy, and there'd be like 10 of them you needed to use to load this, not even megabyte game.
I was trying to find a picture of it, but the original box for King's Quest 4, I remember this when I bought it from, probably was it Babbage? Electronics Boutique. That's the one I remember.
And you tell me, was the reason that you had to install those discs all the time because it was too big to install?
Well,
on the
sometimes,
hard drive,
and
right?
the big part of it was there was a sticker on the front of that King's Quest 4 box that said the largest game ever made. It was like 3.5 megabytes. And this all sounds like Greek to anybody who's probably not at least in 35 at this point, maybe 38. Right. I don't know. But yeah, you could probably fit. It would take what? It would take on single-sided discs. It would take you at least 6 or 7 discs to have a 4 megabyte game. And that's assuming there's some kind of level of basic compression. So yeah, and that was just think about that. The largest game ever, the entirety of King's Quest 4, where I'm hanging out in the background there, 4 megs. I can't even imagine a half of a texture or a dot on a skin for a weapon in a game nowadays is even less than that.
Even less than that.
It would take you like 45 minutes to install that.
That's very true.
I mean, we're talking about the times when we would pull out the magazines. I mean, they had technical articles explaining how these hard drives could not get any larger.
Patrick?
Yeah, SpongeBob?
I don't think this bubble can get much bigger.
There's no way they could ever meet that 1,000 meg limit. The platters would be this huge.
I don't think you know how big 12 inches is.
It's insane. It's insane.
when I was in college, our professor, this was back in like 2002, three, talking about how they had in the laboratory, they were working on the 1 terabyte uh, hard drive, and that this hard drive will be able to fit all of mankind's written work on this one drive, and it just blew his mind. And now I'm thinking like my 1 terabyte's nothing, you know?
Yeah.
So let's bring it back a little bit. I mean, we're talking about those early games. What was like your favorite, Michael?
I have to go back a little bit and say, like, I got into it, like, one of the first things I ever had for my Commodore 64 was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy from Infocom. Just the text adventure. I remember going into the store, and I think at the time, these are places that no longer exist. We had a bookstore called Crown Books, and they had a little software section in front of the store. And you remember Crown Books?
Yeah, Super Crown. And
Super Crown was the later version, yeah. And Infocom games were always ones that they had what were called feelies inside the boxes. And Travis, we mentioned this before in a previous show, but they actually gave you things that were related to what you were going to experience in the game, just as a goofy way of promoting the game. But even before I had a real computer, I would go in there and open up the front lid and kind of look through the manual, which was done up like a book or a travel guide or a magazine or something to immerse you in it. And then inside there was a clear plastic sheet behind the box, and you could see in. And I remember Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy had a microscopic space fleet, which was basically a tiny plastic baggie stapled shut with a label on top. They had blackout sunglasses. They were just cardboard sunglasses with no lenses. Space fluff, which was literally a piece of cotton, but it was kind of a way to make something come alive when all you were going to have on the screen was text to read. But jumping ahead, so yeah, I remember there was a book I had. I think I might have it available to show. It was this book, the official book of King's Quest. And again, now before I got my first computer, I had bought this book and I read it cover to cover to cover over and over again, because this was the story of how Ken and Roberta Williams came up with the idea for the King's Quest games, how the programming worked back then, the story of how this King's Quest 1 was made to help promote the IBM PC Junior. And I read that book just till it was worn out. And I love the pictures. It's so old school to see these weird collision detection maps they would overlay and talk about how somebody had to walk on every single pixel in the game and make sure you didn't get stuck or fall through or go somewhere you weren't supposed to go. And I was just enthralled by the idea of like being dropped in a world and just typing and figuring it out, to the point where my first 8 or 10 games I got for my first computer, like in 1991, were all Sierra games.
That's a lot of nuts!
It was Space Quest 3, King's Quest 4, one of the police quests, maybe it was 2 or 3. And I would actually take the Sierra boxes and tape them on my wall as decorations. I was just like immersed in all those games. So it was fun. I mean, I liked it. They were hard as all get out. And they were brutal. Back in the day, and we'll talk about how it changed later with LucasArts coming into the picture, but you don't pick up something in one of the first 3 screens, you might play that game. You know it already, Travis. You might play it for the next 3 weeks. And oops, you needed that nail that was sticking out of a log in the very first screen, and without it, you got to start the whole game over. Or hope you have a save game, and save scumming, and go back a little bit until you got it right. Hey.
So, Travis, I'm going to go out on a limb here. So just give me a thought. Heroes Quest. That was your favorite?
Because that was the one I started with.
All right.
When I first went to his house, and that's back. It was actually Heroes Quest. It was the original Hero Quest before they changed the name on it. But yeah, it blew me away. That was one of those games where, because I had never seen anything like that before, and then I go to his house and it's like, oh, you got this, you actually type the stuff in, the words, like look at the, the wall, and it was just amazing to me. I'll always remember, and I think I've said this before, but that the part on Quest for Glory where if you're a thief, you can break into the sheriff's house, right?
That's unreal because Travis or Justin was just talking about that with me the other day.
Well, yeah. So you know how they had one of the things you could steal was the candelabra, but I didn't know I didn't know what it was called. I'd never heard of a candelabra.
What? What the?
So I'm like, take the candles. It's like I don't know what that is. I'm like, take the candle holder, and like and I had look at what and I remember that just frustrating me for like 15 minutes trying to steal this damn candle. I couldn't figure out what it was called. But yeah, those games were awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
that one, and then I got into Space Quest. I don't think I played too much of the Police Quest. I played the Space Quest, the Quest for Glory series, the Colonel's B Quest, which was they had like a sequel to that, right? It was like the Eye of Amun-Ra or something like that.
Was that this? I think it was the same main character. It was the girl who was like the amateur detective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was her. That was one of the. That's when they moved into point and click, and there was no typing. I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I never played that one, but yeah, those games were got a fond memory of that. Like even maybe a few years ago, I went back and played Quest for Glory, the original 16 color one.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a good time with that. So
that was
something up for me.
That was something else too, because like he just had the 16-bit color one. So when these first started out, like this was like, was it? Gosh, Justin, EGA was 16 colors, right? CGA was 4, EGA was 16, VGA was 256.
256, yeah.
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle.
So most of that's the thing is they wanted a game to show off the EGA graphics, and that's kind of where King's Quest 1 was designed to be so colorful and bright. Hence what that book taught me that many years ago. Kind of like they used to refer to the main character in the game as Ego in the development process, because that's the name for the character, right? And then just like kind of like Travis, I think he realizes as Guybrush's second cousin, you can actually imagine where Guybrush Threepwood from Monkey Island, where his name came from. They called the graphics brushes, and this was the guy who was the character, hence he was Guybrush. And that just stuck because it makes sense. But with those games, they kind of evolve. So we actually were just talking about remakes and remasters. And now that I think about it, that was almost like our first generation of remastering games, because suddenly you'd have the King's Quest 1 version, but it was in VGA. Or it would be in, now, okay, it's King's Quest 5 was, I think, the one where you were King Graham, and that was one of the first ones to come on a CD. Or it came on floppies first. Then there was the CD version that had all orchestrated music and actual voice acting. And that was just mind-blowing. So they did kind of remake them, but also reimagine them. But one of the harder things to it, though, is when the graphics were so basic, you couldn't tell what some of that stuff on the screen was. So
but it was pretty amazing what they did with the limited colors. They learned a lot of techniques to make it feel like there was more than 16 colors. I mean, look at your background right now. That's 16 colors, right? You're saying?
This might have, I think that might have been the 16 color version. Yeah.
That's not the 256 one, that's for sure.
Yeah, right.
No,
but
this is King's Quest 4.
But your mind goes, is it? Are you sure?
Yeah.
Maybe, right? Now, that being said, there's also resolution changes that happen as we went up to VGA and things like that too. So, but that brings up something else then. You talk about remakes. Remember when they first hit the consoles on the Sega?
Travis and I talked about that in our favorite Sega Master System games, and we actually had that on our list because he liked it because he didn't get, like he said, he didn't get to play it because he didn't have a computer. So here was his chance to play it on the Sega Master System. And for me, I was just like, how the hell do you get a text typing game adventure onto the Master System? I was fascinated by the attempt to port it.
Yeah,
well, I think you were big on Maniac Mansion, right?
Oh, Maniac Mansion, we're going to get to that. That's a whole different ball of wax.
But let's stay on King's Quest real quick. Let's work our way. So we've done the original text version. Then we got to the click remakes. Have any of you played the most recent iteration of the King's Quest? The
most recent?
one that they had.
Which one?
They have an episodic one that came out.
Oh, I played that on my PS3 question mark. And I think I played the first 2 chapters. I think it might have been free, like on the PlayStation Plus service at the time.
Yep, we played it, and yeah, I played it. The family wanted to play it, and they enjoyed all of it. And it had so much to me, it had a lot of it brought a lot of the connections that some of the games in the middle missed. Like we talked about the 3D versions and stuff. It had a lot of that charm. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend playing it. It's good. It's fun. Now it is if I remember correctly, it is the point and click, and you have the context type stuff. But
let's jump to that really quick, so anybody doesn't understand what we're talking about. Is that we went from a typing interface. You know, you would use your arrow keys, or I guess you could use a mouse if you had one back then, right, to move around the screen. But then you would stand in front of something and you would look in the barrel. It would say, there's a fish in the barrel. And you would say, take fish. And it would say, you can't catch the fish. It slips through your hands. So you had to go find a net somewhere and take the net and then bring it over and then use net to catch fish. That was the kind of process. When they started to, in my mind, dumb it down and go to point and click, like you said, Justin, it was context sensitive. You just move the mouse icon over things. If you moved it over the barrel, you could right click and it would change from an eye to a hand to maybe something else context sensitive, and you would click on it and it would say, there's a fish in the barrel. So you go find a net, click on the wall, bring it over, walk over to the barrel, open up your inventory, click on the net, and then drag it over the barrel. There was no more actual interaction. It was all just visual. And it's fine. It wasn't horrendous, but I think it took away some of the fun, like of Travis learning to spell candelabra, and sometimes us trying really stupid stuff as a thief in Heroes Quest to break into something. Because when all you can do is just click on a window or use a lockpick on it, it's not as creative as trying to throw something through it or bash window or... You know, so I think that's where we started to get a little bit like, it does bring in a better audience though for the manufacturer, right? Because people who want to just be entertained, older or younger, might be turned away by the idea of having to type and read, and so
sure. But think about go back even further. Then let's go back where we started this whole conversation, because I know my grandfather had talked about this. He played the original Infocom stuff, Hitchhiker's Guide and whatnot, where you had to use your brain to picture. Your mind to picture what was happening.
Right.
And then now they did graphics. Yeah, it was still typing and it was still difficult, but he's like, yeah, but you can see the room and you see a window and it tells you to open the window then, right? So, you know, each generation we can always seem to find something to complain about on that. But I do agree that for me, it did seem like it simplified things and they had to find new ways of making it more, or to keep that challenge.
Oh, but you know what?
I think it was a net positive.
The industry changed too, right? So back in the original days, you didn't have computers with mice. Mice were like $80 to $100 add-ons with a single button, maybe. There were no gaming mice with multiple DPI and LED lights and 17 buttons and switches and all that. And so you basically had your keyboard with your arrow keys, and that was your interface into the world.
Who can use a mouse with just one button?
I have one on my Commodore 64, and I can't think of what I ever used it for on my Commodore. But there was something.
64.
There was something on the Commodore 64, so we move into the next generation off of Sierra, and that's when LucasArts decided, and that's George Lucas of LucasArts, decided to get into the adventure game genre. And the first big one was, what was it, Justin?
Well, I don't know the timing. I thought it was Loom, but was it Maniac Mansion?
It was Maniac Mansion.
It was
because I had Loom on my first PC. But we had Maniac Mansion. Did we not have it on the Commodore? I
thought we had it on your PC. That being said, again,
that's what memories get hazy.
My memory's hazy, but I always remembered Loom being their big. And to me, Maniac Mansion should have been a big, because it's just a great game. and the ability to switch characters. What? Right.
Travis, did you play Maniac Mansion?
I never played Maniac Mansion.
So, Justin, I want you to run with Maniac Mansion, but the one thing I want to point out was this was a good blending of the genres, because like you just mentioned, you actually got to pick your 3 characters in the game from a pool of like 7 or 8 kids, and each had their own skills and different ways to solve a puzzle. So it gave amazing replayability, but unlike Loom, this actually introduced that SCUM interface where you had a bunch of words at the bottom. And so rather than just click on something, you would click on the words pickup and then hover the mouse over things that were actually interactive, and you could try and pick it up, or you could push it or pull it or open it or use it. So it kind of blended both worlds. You now had to go ahead and use the thought process rather than just randomly clicking on everything. But it still kind of lets you be a little bit guided and not, well, you're not going to get stuck somewhere too badly. Although Maniac Mansion was one of the last games that actually let you die.
Maniac Mansion did come first. I had to double check
was that right?
And that's you're always right. But I have to bring up the one memory that it now is just flooding back. Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders. That game is the one that got me hooked on that style of clicking and looking and doing and putting the stupid egg in the microwave. And, just that's what I mean by solving things. Like, it was unique. That game really pushed it to the level. So...
Zach McCracken, I think, you can find it on GOG.com. It's on there. I think it's actually like a 256-bit enhanced version of it. All of those games use what they call blue sky logic, though, because, some of the puzzles make sense once you figure them out, but some of the rest of them, you're like, you have to use the carrot to pick a lock or to shape... to get the shape of the lock so you can take it to the locksmith and then he can make a key for you based on it. And it's things you wouldn't normally think about doing. And Maniac Mansion had a lot of that with, you could do things like put a hamster in the microwave. Ironically, in Zach McCracken, you could put the fish in the garbage disposal. So apparently in the beginning, they had something for the killing of small animals. But the same thing too, you needed that hamster. You didn't need the fish. You needed the fish bowl in Zach McCracken, but you could actually get yourself to a point where you screwed up and you got to hope you can reload again. But I remember playing Zach McCracken with you, and that was definitely, it was a very, it was a unique game with the two-headed squirrel and solving an alien mystery on Mars.
Yeah, it was a very unique game.
Can I spoil? I want to spoil the ending because that's what blew my mind.
Spoiler. Do
you remember?
Turn away now.
Do you remember on Zach McCracken that the end of the game was right below your apartment where you first start the game?
Yes.
So you literally go from your apartment out into the world onto Mars and back to your apartment, and you could have gone underground the whole time, and that would have solved the whole mystery. Yep. That was, you went on and that was the kind of logic and they use and humor in LucasArts games, all the way through Secret of Monkey Island and that series. The writing and the style really changed and got better, and you actually were experiencing a story that they were telling you that you were a part of, which I think was opposite of what they did with Sierra, where they just put you in and said, you make the story, here, there's a plot line you got to do, you go ahead and figure out how it happens. Whereas LucasArts was like, here's where you are, solve the puzzle and advance the story. And I think I kind of like that a bit more.
Do you think, now, so jumping over to Sierra, because there was one guy who worked over at Sierra and was given free reign to write his stories the way he wanted to, Mr. Rob. Leisure Suit Larry.
Al
Lowe.
Lowe. Yeah, now Rob. Al Lowe. Sorry.
Rob Lowe. Different thing that might have been involved in that same kind of topic.
That's his brother.
Yeah. There you go. Told you, the brain cells don't always fire off correctly. But anyway, those stories had a way of doing exactly that, in that it was weird and you solved things kind of a weird way, but then they kind of make sense. Like, okay. And I thought it was interesting that he was allowed freedom to go off in a way that was definitely risque for someone like Sierra at the time, who was doing King's Quest and fantasy things and wholesome things. And I thought it worked. And that's my grandfather introduced me to that game, believe it or not.
Dirty old like they had a one part where you go to the comedy club and the guy's telling jokes, and you could literally sit there for an hour and he would tell you like different jokes for an hour.
Different jokes.
They actually programmed like multiple hours worth of like thousands of jokes in there, and they were good jokes. It just blew my mind. And then you remember, was it Leisure Suit Larry 5? Like they skipped 4. They went from 3 to 5. Like who does that, right?
Yeah.
Remind me. They didn't have Leisure Suit Larry 4?
I think they went from Leisure Suit Larry 3, and then they just skipped it and went to Leisure Suit Larry 5.
So to be honest, I did play them, but they were funny. the Leisure Suit Larry series, which ironically, I was actually looking up the dates, and Sierra was releasing 2 or 3 games a year, because King's Quest was 1983, like 1983, 84, depends on what systems it was out for yet. And then Space Quest was 86, and Leisure Suit Larry was 87, and then Quest for Glory was 88. So, and I guess we should probably just say Leisure Suit Larry, there's versions of it out now, but the original game was a point-and-click adventure about a guy in... Was he in his 30s? That makes me feel really old now. We thought he was old back then.
I think the original was text.
It was typing. Yes, it was a graphic adventure. Yeah, you're helping a 30-year-old man lose his virginity, but it was done tongue-in-cheek. And I mean, I'll be honest. I remember as a kid when they would do the quote-unquote the risque close-ups of the girls, and it was like 16-bit. And as a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And you think about what
it wasn't
kids
like
can see
today
now.
where you can get on the internet and see this kind of stuff. Like you either found your dad's magazines, you would watch HBO, and it was all
Justin, who did that? Who watched wavy
or something on
HBO?
Cinemax?
Beaver, fern, bush, beaver, bush, beaver, fern. Now that's a fern.
I just had an idea. Travis has never gotten to play any of those text games. Why don't we have him play Hitchhiker's Guide, and we watch as he obviously solves every single puzzle in record time. Do not look up hints, Travis.
Well, the good news is there's no candelabras in it, so he's already ahead of the game there.
Can he spell candelabra?
Yeah, I'm not a very good speller anymore. Does that game have spell check in it?
Actually, I will leave us off with this. I will tell the story of my first adventure with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I think I was 8 when I got my Commodore 64, and maybe younger. I don't know. I was a late believer in Santa Claus, probably because I knew I was getting gifts, so better to keep the gravy train rolling. But I wanted a Commodore 64 for Christmas, and one of the 2 things I asked for, other than Ghostbusters, my first game ever, was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I started playing it. And I learned something. So to answer your question, Travis, no, because Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy only looks at, or the parser back then for Infocom, only looks at the first 6 letters of a word. So for example, bulldog and bulldozer, exact same thing. So I remember asking my dad after Christmas, I said, oh, I'm so glad I got my Commodore 64 from Santa, but why didn't he bring me all of the software that I asked for? And without missing a beat, he goes, maybe Santa wanted to make sure you liked it first, which was a great thing. And I later found out they wanted to get it because they thought it would help me learn how to spell things. But in reality, I quickly learned from the strategy guide that, it looks at the first 6 letters. So you started to learn how to abbreviate everything. So Travis, Candela, you're good.